So we're going to talk about a new unit today. So we're going to start a new unit, and it's going to be ecology. So what are we going to be thinking about? Ecology, we're going to be thinking about living organisms and their relationships with other living things and their relationship with the environment. So that is going to be where we go with this. Ecology tends to be a unit that you guys will really enjoy and constantly be thinking about how this applies to other things we've already learned. So first off, ecology. Where does it come from, this word ecology? Well, it comes from the Greek words oikos, which means house, and ology, which is to study. So it's the study of a house. Okay, well, let's figure out what this house is. An organism in its house. Well, what is a house in ecology? Let's look at that. And first, part of what your house is going to be is your interactions with other organisms of the same species. So if you think about that, you as a human, you have an ecology, just like a chipmunk has an ecology, or a tree. So we all, as organisms, have interactions with our same species, and that shapes a lot of what is our quote-unquote house and how we are going to interact. The other interaction is with organisms of other species. So if you are a rattlesnake, your interactions with mice are significant. They are your prey and your food source. So if something happens to them, something's going to happen to you, and you have a reliance upon them. And so that is this reliance and different types of reactions that we have in these interactions with other species is the other part of the house. Another part of this quote-unquote house that we think about is the interaction with their environment. Each organism interacts with their environment. And so the environment includes the weather, the soil, the rocks, the amount of water available. All of these are things that are not living and part of this environment. I'd like you to take a step back now and look at what exactly is encompassed when we talk about ecology. So up to this point, we've talked about living things in biology, and we started very, very small with molecules, and you'll see on the diagram here, atoms to molecules. We've dealt with protoplasm and cells, what's going on inside of cells and the organelles and their interactions, what's going inside the nucleus with the genetics. We haven't done a whole lot with tissues and organs, but that is, these levels of organization. And remember, we talked about what constitutes a living thing. And living things have these levels of organization. And this is what we were talking about with levels of organization. When we start talking about ecology, things get much, much bigger. We start to really expand what we're looking at here. So, in the green, you will see these levels of ecology. And ecology, you can start at the organismal level, and that's an individual organism, a certain species. You can look at population. You can look at a collection of a certain species, and that's called a population. Communities, and that's a mixed species group. Ecosystems, and that's where we look at a particular type of region and the different types of organisms that live in that region. Biomes, we start talking about all the living portions of a particular region, and then the biosphere is like everything on Earth that is living. So it starts to really build. Ecology, you'll note, has a very broad definitional look at this, because when we're talking about these homes of organisms, what part of the home are we talking about here? And that is where this comes into play. So just to kind of put this into perspective, beginning of the year, we dealt with a lot of the bottom part of this list. And in ecology, now we're moving up the list. And for the rest of this year, we'll go a little bit back to some stuff inside the nucleus, but basically we're going to be at a much bigger scale, or a macro scale. Here's another way, again, to look at the same concept, starting with the molecule. We went to the cell, and from the cell, you go to tissues and organs. Now, tissues and organs, if you take anatomy and physiology, you go way deep into that particular area, and we don't delve real deeply in that area in general biology. But these building up the cells, you get a tissue, building up of tissues, you get an organ, and then you get a body system, like the digestive system or something like that. And you build all that together and you get an organism. And so, and here you see the elephant. The elephant is your organism. You get a bunch of elephants together. That's a population. Then maybe you have some elephants hanging out with some giraffes and some hyenas and some other things. That's the community, and there's an acacia tree, all that. And then it builds even bigger into the ecosystem. So that whole level from organism all the way to ecosystem all could be considered what we can look at when we talk about ecology. So let's talk a little bit about the biosphere here. Biosphere is what we focus on when we in ecology, and that is where we have living things on Earth. And so we're going to be looking at this map for a second. And on this map, you'll notice that one way to trace living things is through looking at where there's photosynthesis taking place, and we have the really green areas here, and the darker green on the land portion of this globe. That's where you have the maximum amount of biotic support for biotic systems happening. And then as it gets yellow, that's where and tan, those are where there's less of that happening. In the water systems, the areas that are the areas are also somewhat different depending on where algae and photosynthetic algae can come up and start to photosynthesize and allow for life to take place, because that basically is where a lot of foundations of life exist. So, remembering with the biosphere, it's the portion of the Earth that supports life. That is what the biosphere is. So make sure you get that definition. Biosphere is the portion of Earth that supports life. And when we look at the biosphere, we focus on plants and photosynthetic algae. Okay? So we'll look at phytoplankton in the case of the oceans. What we're looking at is things that photosynthesize, because ultimately we all rely, all the larger levels or higher levels of plants, animals, fungi, etc., rely on this process of photosynthesis to get their food source. So where photosynthesis takes place, that is where living things can be supported. Next, we're going to look at classifying an organism's house. Okay, so what are our classifications of the environment when we talk about, when we talk in ecology? So there's one of the major divisions are biotic factors versus abiotic factors. So make sure you get this down, this division in how we think of the factors that affect a living organism. Biotic factors, those are living factors in an organism's environment. Okay, I put a green hornet there, but anything living can affect the ability of, it can interact with another living thing and affect what happens to it. We have abiotic factors, and those are non-living factors in an organism's environment. So examples I gave here is the amount of sunshine you get. Sunshine is not living, but it affects whether or not you're going to be having a lot of living things supported in the area or not. Rain, that'd be another example of a non-living thing, but with lots of impact on how much of the biotic system can be. So we're going to do a little test of your knowledge and see if you can figure out the biotic versus abiotic factors. So as we're going through here, write down, is that a biotic or abiotic factor that we're observing here? Give you a second to look at that. Okay, we have two elk, I believe, here having a little tussle, and that would be biotic. Competition within your own species, that is, the elk is biotic and the other elk is biotic, and so they're biotic. Okay, let's look at this next one. If you can make that out, we seem to have some palm trees and there's some wind going on there. And wind, of course, is abiotic. So the major factor here that we were looking at is an abiotic factor. Now, you could make the argument that this is a biotic factor if you said something about the competition between the palm trees, and you could make some sort of argument there. But the focus of this picture is wind, and so is the case. Okay, here we have a molecule. Well, that gives away a lot. Although molecules, we studied living molecules or organic molecules earlier in the term. What do you think this one is? Okay, so N, of course, is nitrogen. There's no carbon involved, and I don't know of any organic molecule, or big four, definitely you can't just have nitrogen and be a big four, so this would be abiotic. But the amount of nitrogen available to plants in particular is key in their development. And so nitrogen is a very important factor in growth. And that's largely because they are in the big four. Nitrogen is always found there. Okay. What do you see here? You may have seen pictures like this before or may not have. It's kind of cool. So you seem to have some fly larvae attacking a caterpillar and killing the caterpillar. So those are maggots eating on a caterpillar. And that would be, yes, that would be biotic. And it would be biotic because, of course, the maggots are living and so is the caterpillar. So that is a parasitism type of relationship. Let's try another one of these. What is this? You may or may not have seen pictures of this type of thing. This is actually soil. So soil, is that a biotic or abiotic factor? Largely abiotic. Now, and I would just want to bring this out, if you think about your soil, you could make argumentation that it has a biotic component to it, because definitely there is a lot of fungal aspects to soil. There are some, bacterial aspects to soil, the whole root area. So there's lots of biotic things going on in the soil, but it's largely abiotic. The mineral part of the soil is abiotic. Okay, so now we're going to wrap this up here, and we're going to look at, just kind of do this division between the abiotic and biotic factors that influence an ecosystem and influence an organism's environment. So this really is when we talk about the home of ecology, what makes up this home? So let's start with abiotic, or that which is not living. We'll start with elements of our air. We have oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, for example. Other abiotic factors include water, light, wind, soil, pH being how acidic or basic a particular environment is, temperature, salinity, so the amount of the level of salt that exists in a particular area that can affect both either in soil or in the water, depending on what type of organism we're focusing on. Humidity, that's a huge factor, and that's the amount of moisture in the air. And if you've been to climates such as that which you find on the east coast of the United States in the summer, it gets very hot and humid. Inorganic nutrients that can be found in the soil, such as nitrogen and phosphorus. So these are just a sampling of abiotic factors that affect what can live in a particular area. Let's think about now some biotic factors, other organisms. So what we're looking at there is there competition for resources? Competition is from another organism. Predation is there's something coming after you. If predators are too aggressive, you may have an organism that can no longer live in a particular environment, and that's why you don't have all species living in every single place on the map. We have some species that live in some place and some species that live in other places, and these factors affect that. Another biotic factor is symbiosis. And we'll be talking about some fun symbiotic relationships. One is mutualism, okay? And mutualism is where each organism involved in the relationship has a benefit from being in the relationship. And so there's the acacia tree with ants. The ants will fend off predators and things that are things that want to eat the acacia tree, and in turn, the acacia tree actually provides shelter for the ants to have their colonies on. Parasitism, and that we saw a picture of parasitism, and this is where one of the organisms definitely loses out, but the other organism gets a benefit from the relationship. And then we also have disease agents, so things like viruses, bacteria, and fungi, and not all fungi and not all bacteria, but viruses especially, and also prions, they can come in to an organism and cause disease, and so this is another example. So this is our intro into ecology, and we're going to be building on these concepts.